History of Taiwan. Taiwan's people have shaped the island's history. In turn, the population's ideas and attitudes have been deeply influenced by local experience as well as the impact of China and Japan. Migrants from the Chinese mainland, the first of whom landed in the Tainan area almost 400 years ago, turned the island from a realm where Austronesian hunter-gatherers lived almost Stone Age lives into a densely populated Chinese society. Events on the Chinese mainland, most recently the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, resulted in additional waves of migrations. The sheer density of Taiwan's population is said to be a factor in making modern Taiwanese society highly competitive and entrepreneurial, yet also urban-centered and outward-looking. Taiwan's early days, until 1683, Taiwan has been inhabited for perhaps 30,000 years, but until the 16th century it was terra incognita. The island's Aboriginal people occasionally traded with outsiders, but even the Chinese Empire knew very little about this island, just 180 kilometers off China's southeastern coast. In 1544, passing Portuguese seafarers dubbed Taiwan Isla Formosa, beautiful island, bestowing a name which Westerners used until well after World War II. The Dutch East India Company founded a small colony on Taiwan's southwest coast in 1624, at what's now Tainan. The Dutch called this spot Taijuan, a place name which evolved into the Mandarin term for the whole island, Taiwan. Some years later, they established another base in the north, at Tamsui, Danshui. The Dutch traded in sugar, rice, pepper, silk and satin, porcelain, pepper, nutmeg and cinnamon. They found their Taiwan operation highly profitable, and would surely have stayed much longer but for Coxinger, a military leader Chinese people know as Zheng Chunggong. Coxinger was an ardent supporter of China's Ming dynasty, and after the last Ming emperor was overthrown by Manchu warriors in 1644, he gathered fellow Ming loyalists and launched a campaign to oust the newly founded Qing dynasty. He suffered a series of defeats and was pushed southward. By 1660, Coxinger was eyeing Taiwan as a place where he could regroup. The following year he took the Dutch by surprise, surrounding Fort Zeelandia and Fort Provincia in Tainan. The latter fell 2 days later, but the former held out until early 1662, when disease, hunger and a worsening military situation forced the surviving Europeans. The Dutch East India Company governor was actually Swedish. Many of his soldiers were German, to surrender on condition they be allowed to sail to the company's headquarters in what's now Indonesia. Coxinger didn't enjoy his victory for long. He changed the name of Taijuan to Anping, then died of malaria. The state he created in Taiwan, the Kingdom of Dongning, lasted 21 years. When Qing forces attacked in 1683, Coxinger's teenage grandson quickly threw in the towel and the island became part of the Chinese Empire. Taiwan as part of the Chinese Empire, 1683 to 1895. The Qing Empire now had possession of Taiwan but didn't know what to do with it. Because Ming loyalists like Coxinger no longer posed a threat, some advised the emperor to abandon what they considered worthless territory. In the end, Taiwan was incorporated into the empire. Migration from the Chinese mainland to the island was prohibited, but grinding poverty and food shortages meant thousands of peasants in nearby Fujian, a mainland Chinese province, ignored this rule and sought better lives in Taiwan. The 18th century saw the emergence of sizable Chinese towns such as Chiayi, Hsinchu and Taipei, as well as the founding of many of Taiwan's most important temples. However, because the government and judicial systems were thoroughly corrupt, the island was often lawless. Banditry was widespread. Immigrants from different parts of Fujian fought each other and the Aborigines over land and water rights. By 1811, Taiwan's population exceeded 2 million. Intermarriage between Fujianese and Hakka men and Aboriginal women was very common, and is one reason why the lowland tribes were quickly assimilated. Studies of Taiwanese DNA have found most people have Aboriginal blood in their veins. In the second half of the 19th century, Taiwan started to attract Western and Japanese interest for economic and strategic reasons. The first Christian missionaries since the Dutch era arrived in 1859, and a shipwreck near what's now Kenting National Park in late 1871 led to a brief Japanese invasion. Keelung and Danshui near Taipei, Anping in Tainan, and Kaohsiung became treaty ports, where the citizens of the British Empire, Russia, Japan and some other countries enjoyed special privileges, such as immunity from arrest. In 1884–85, when the French were fighting with China over Vietnam, French soldiers occupied Keelung and the Penghu Islands. Because of these incursions, the imperial court in Beijing was forced to pay proper attention to Taiwan, commissioning forts and a railway. Also, Taiwan was finally upgraded to a province in its own right. Before 1885, it had been treated as part of Fujian. Taiwan becomes a colony of Japan. 1895–1945. The war which broke out between China and Japan in the summer of 1894 had nothing to do with Taiwan, but China's defeat led to the Qing Empire ceding Taiwan and the Penghu Islands to Japan. Some Taiwanese resisted the takeover, and the Japanese army spent 6 months, and lost thousands of men, crushing local guerrilla forces. Most of the Japanese deaths were the result of disease, not bullet wounds. Taiwan's new masters realized that tackling malaria and cholera had to be a priority. In the first 20 years of Japanese rule, great improvements were made in public health. Opium addiction was curbed. Roads were built and the railway network was expanded. However, Japanese control of natural resources such as coal and forests, in the latter, camphor was an especially valuable commodity, led to resentment. Taiwan's kin have molded the island's set of experiences. Thusly, the populace's thoughts and perspectives have been profoundly affected by neighborhood experience, just as the effect of China and Japan. Transients from the Chinese terrain, the first of whom arrived in the Tainan region just about 400 years prior, diverted the island from a domain where Austronesian tracker finders lived practically Stone Age lives into a thickly populated Chinese society. Occasions on the Chinese territory, most as of late the finish of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, brought about extra floods of movements. The sheer thickness of Taiwan's populace is supposed to be a factor in making present-day Taiwanese society exceptionally aggressive and enterprising, yet likewise metropolitan-focused and outward-looking. Taiwan's initial days, until 1683. Taiwan has been occupied for maybe 30,000 years, however until the 16th century it was backcountry. The island's native individuals incidentally exchanged with pariahs, yet even the Chinese domain knew next to no about this island, only 180 kilometers off China's southeastern coast. In 1544, passing Portuguese sailors named Taiwan Isla Formosa, Lovely Island, giving a name which Westerners utilized until well after World War II. The Dutch East India Company established a little state on Taiwan's southwest coast in 1624, at what's presently Tainan. The Dutch called this spot Taijuan, a spot name which advanced into the Mandarin expression for the entire island, Taiwan. A few years after the fact, they set up another base in the north, at Tamsui, Danshui. The Dutch exchanged sugar, rice, pepper, silk and glossy silk, porcelain, pepper, nutmeg and cinnamon. They discovered their Taiwan activity exceptionally beneficial, and would doubtlessly have remained any longer yet for Coxinger, a military chief Chinese individuals know as Zheng Chunggong. Coxinger was a vigorous ally of China's Ming dynasty, and after the last Ming ruler was toppled by Manchu heroes in 1644, he accumulated individual Ming supporters and dispatched a mission to remove the recently established Qing dynasty. He endured a progression of losses and was pushed toward the south. By 1660, Coxinger was looking at Taiwan as where he could refocus. The next year he overwhelmed the Dutch, encompassing Fort Zeelandia and Fort Provincia in Tainan. The last fell 2 days after the fact, yet the previous held out until mid-1662, when infection, hunger and a deteriorating military circumstance constrained the enduring Europeans. The Dutch East India Company lead representative was really Swedish. A large number of his warriors were German, to give up on condition they be permitted to sail to the organization's central command in what's currently Indonesia. Coxinger didn't make the most of his triumph for long. He changed the name of Taijuan to Anping, at that point kicked the bucket of intestinal sickness. The state he made in Taiwan, the Kingdom of Dongning, kept going 21 years. When Qing powers assaulted in 1683, Coxinger's high school grandson immediately called it quits, and the island turned out to be essential for the Chinese realm. Taiwan is a feature of the Chinese Empire, 1683 to 1895. The Qing domain presently had ownership of Taiwan, yet didn't have the foggiest idea how to manage it. Since Ming supporters like Coxinger not, at this point, represented a danger, some encouraged the head to surrender what they thought about useless domain. Eventually, Taiwan was consolidated into the domain. Relocation from the Chinese territory to the island was disallowed. However, crushing neediness and food deficiencies implied a large number of workers in close-by Fukien, a terrain Chinese region, overlooked this standard and looked for better lives in Taiwan. The 18th century saw the development of sizable Chinese towns like Chiayi, Hsinchu and Taipei, just as the establishing of a considerable lot of Taiwan's most significant sanctuaries. Notwithstanding, in light of the fact that the public authority and legal frameworks were completely bad, the island was regularly uncivilized. Banditry was far-reaching. Settlers from various pieces of Fukien battled one another and the natives over land and water rights. By 1811, Taiwan's populace surpassed 2 million. Intermarriage among Fujianese and Hakka men and native ladies was normal, and is one motivation behind why the marsh clans were immediately acclimatized. Investigations of Taiwanese DNA have discovered the vast majority have native blood in their veins. In the second 50% of the 19th century, Taiwan began to pull in Western and Japanese premium for financial and vital reasons. The primary Christian preachers since the Dutch time showed up in 1859, and a wreck close to what's currently Kenting National Park in late 1871 prompted a short Japanese attack. Keelung and Danshui close to Taipei, Anping in Tainan, and Kaohsiung became deal ports, the place where the residents of the British Empire, Russia, Japan and some different nations appreciated unique advantages, like invulnerability from capture. In 1884–85, when the French were battling with China over Vietnam, French troopers involved Keelung and the Penghu Islands. As a result of these invasions, the majestic court in Beijing had to give appropriate consideration to Taiwan, dispatching fortifications and a railroad. Additionally, Taiwan was at long last moved up to an area by its own doing. Before 1885, it had been treated as a feature of Fukien. Taiwan turns into a settlement of Japan, 1895–1945. The conflict what broke out among China and Japan in the mid-year of 1894 had nothing to do with Taiwan, yet China's loss prompted the Qing domain surrendering Taiwan and the Penghu Islands to Japan. Some Taiwanese opposed the takeover, and the Japanese army went through a half year, and lost large number of men, pulverizing neighborhood guerrilla powers. The majority of the Japanese passings were the aftereffect of sickness, not projectile injuries. Taiwan's new experts understood that handling jungle fever and cholera must be a need. In the initial 20 years of Japanese standard, extraordinary enhancements were made in general well-being. Opium enslavement was checked. Streets were fabricated and the railroad network was extended. Notwithstanding Japanese control of common assets like coal and woodlands, in the last mentioned, camphor was a particularly important item, prompted disdain. The native populace had extra complaints, the frontier specialists removed their firearms and genealogical grounds, and constrained tribespeople to give work to government projects. In the fall of 1930, Mona Rudao drove an uprising portrayed in the 2011 Taiwanese epic film, Champions of the Rainbow, Sidique Bale. His champions butchered Japanese residents at a school and did quick in and out assaults on Japanese army units and favorable to Japanese natives. At the point when rout got unavoidable, a large portion of Mona Rudao's men decided to end it all instead of give up. During World War II, Japan utilized Taiwan as an organizing base for their triumph of Southeast Asia. A great many Allied detainees of war were held in POW camps in Taiwan. Hundreds passed on because of lack of healthy sustenance and exhaust. In excess of 200,000 Taiwanese served in Japan's military. At the point when World War II finished in Asia, Tokyo denied its states. However, just about 70 years after the fact, Japan's impact in Taiwan is as yet substantial. Japanese-time public structures are milestones in Taipei and somewhere else, and there is a solid connection to Japanese food, culture and style. Taiwan's economy endured significantly during the conflict, and American airstrikes executed large number of regular people. All things considered, toward the finish of the conflict numerous Taiwanese individuals were carefully hopeful about their future. Taiwan after World War II, 1945 to 1975. Following the withdrawal of the Japanese, Taiwan turned out to be essential for the Republic of China, ROC, the state established on the Chinese territory in 1911 when the last head was toppled by Sun Yat-sen and his allies. After World War II, the ROC's leader was Chiang Kai-shek, head of the KMT, Chinese Nationalist Party. Sadly, the man Chiang decided to oversee Taiwan exacerbated a terrible circumstance. The economy was blundered, and there was huge defilement. By 1947 numerous Taiwanese resented the new system, and an uproar in Taipei set off when a horde mediated to stop government specialists beating a lady who'd been selling untaxed cigarettes, transformed into a full-scale uprising. The lead representative played for time and hung tight for fortifications. At the point when they showed up, a huge number of individuals, some were effectively against the KMT, yet many were guiltless, were slaughtered in what's known as the 2-28 incident, supposed in light of the fact that dissidents assaulted government workplaces on February 28. In the meantime on the terrain, the KMT were losing ground to Mao Zedong's communists. In December 1949, Chiang moved to Taiwan, no piece of which had tumbled to the communists, having effectively sent his child, the ROC's gold stores, and China's best imaginative and chronicled treasures. Over 1.5 million territory Chinese followed Chiang, and a ROC system which professed to be the authentic administration of all China was set up in Taipei. No dispute was allowed. Until the 1970s, rivals were regularly secured or executed. Cognizant that their inability to improve the part of China's ruined provincial populace was one explanation the KMT had lost the territory, the new system dispatched a land change program since hailed by specialists the world over as an incredible achievement. Ranchers appreciated more prominent security, and numerous previous landowners utilized the remuneration they got to set up industrial facilities. Sugar, the No. 1 fare between the 1920s and 1950s, was before long surpassed by assembling. As the island flourished, Taiwanese individuals started purchasing electric rice cookers and fridges. Somewhere in the range of 1950 and 1970, the populace nearly multiplied to 14.6 million. In the city, cruisers and vehicles supplanted bikes and bull trucks. Taiwan since 1975. Chiang Kai-shek passed on in 1975. Toward the finish of 1978, a couple of months after Chiang's child Chiang Ching-kuo became president, the USA severed relations with Taipei so it could build up strategic binds with the People's Republic of China. In the 2 years before Chiang Ching-kuo's demise in mid-1988, the KMT started to release their hold on power. Military law was lifted and new ideological groups were allowed. Taiwan presently has around 230. The media got undeniably more frank, and when limitations on abroad travel were lifted, relaxes abroad, counting to the Chinese territory, got well known. Li Tenghui, a rural financial specialist brought into the world in 1923 and taught in Japan and the US, turned into the country's first Taiwan-conceived president. He drove the island further down the vote-based street. Older officials chose on the terrain in 1948, addressing regions they hadn't seen since the communist triumph, had to resign. Taiwan's parliament and papers started to reflect general assessment. In 1996 Li won the island's first genuine official political race, however after 4 years the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, the principal resistance gathering, arose triumphant. In 2008 there was another quiet exchange of force, this time from the DPP back to the KMT. In 2016, the DPP won both the official and parliamentary races. Taiwan appreciated a period of prosperity from the 1980s until the Asian financial crisis of 1997, fueled by innovative items like PC peripherals. From that point forward, development has been more slow. However, Taiwan has gained ground on different fronts, presenting a much appreciated national health insurance framework and social government assistance programs for the handicapped, the older and native individuals. Thanks for watching. Bye now.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Life is Often if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.